Gentlemen, let me open the final part of our conference. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our last keynote speaker, who is Professor Josef Perner from the University of Salzburg. I think that for anybody who knows something about cognitive and developmental psychology, I need to introduce Josef Perner. So, Josef.
Okay. So thank you very much and for inviting me, and sorry that I couldn't get myself to travel to Hradec, Králové in person. But with the corona numbers rising again, it all became rather dangerous. Okay, so I share my screen with you, and this is it. Yeah, all works, at least on my screen, and I hope you can all hear me sufficiently well. So my topic is the 7 heavenly virtues of teleology. So to explain my title, a little preamble. So teleology, what is teleology? Teleology is a theory of the folk psychology of action that Johannes Rössler and I sort of worked on this. And what I have to say is also largely Johannes's work. And we chose teleology as the label for it. And importantly, I'm not talking the psychology of action, but the psychology of folk psychology of action. So this is an important distinction to keep apart. So, but nevertheless, our teleology is influenced by the philosophical action theory. I find it inspirational as a theory of folk psychology of action, but I personally want to stay non-committal on it as a psychological theory of action. Okay. What are the 7 heavenly virtues? Well, I learned by looking it up that there are 4 cardinal virtues, whatever they are, and 3 theological virtues, which interestingly are claimed to be not fully accessible to humans in their natural state without assistance from God. Okay. This classification fits my purpose because teleology, I can list 4 cardinal virtues, and then I have to go to something more complicated, teleology within a perspective, to have the other 3 more, and we need the assistance not from God but from science for that. Okay, what is the objective of my talk? It is I present the virtues of teleology as folk psychology, which takes behavior as acting for good reasons and as advantageous over the dominating view on action, namely that it is explained or understood by a theory of mind, which takes behavior as being caused by mental states. So that's what I want to get across. Pierre Jacob not so recently said, if teleology is the answer, what was the question? There is no question. It is simply better. So, well, you could say that's the virtue number 0, but it's such a simple claim that it doesn't count here. But the word better is the key to teleology. So what is teleology? There is, first, before I get into its virtues, an important restriction to begin with. That basic teleology assumes that we are in a shared world. There are no relevant information contradictions, and therefore no mental states need to be involved to understand what is going on. Access to information can come in as an enabling condition. If somebody doesn't have access to a relevant fact, then he isn't be able to use it in his reasoning. And that provides a certain basis for at least the factive mental states. But other than that, basic teleology tries to understand action or behavior without any recourse to mental states. But that, of course, limits teleology to sort of the standard cases and poses a problem, has a problem with cases where differences of perspective occur. And but interestingly, the perspective is often taken as the hallmark of the mental. So it's when you have to use teleology in perspective, then from our view, that's the point where the mental enters the field. So what is an intentional action? Or any action? I have to get this thing out of the way. Okay, consists in a change in the world from one state, call it S1, to another state, state 2. And reasons for carrying out this action, there are facts that speak in favor of carrying out this action, and there are two types. There are value facts, and that is typically that the second state, the future state, must be better than the earlier state. It is sort of, I would claim in our folk psychology, inconceivable that within a given perspective, standard perspective, that one does something in order to make things worse or at least not better. And then other facts that speak for an action are instrumental facts, so that the action A is apt to bring about sorry, that should be S2, bring about the second, the new situation. And teleology is committed to saying that we act for reasons and not for mental states. If we look at own actions, then the psychology, as implemented in theory of mind, sort of assumes that states are not objectively good, right? There's controversy about what's good and bad. But states are seen by an actor as good because the actor wants that state. Okay. But in folk psychology, if you look at your own actions, that's not how you see it. I can say I want it because it's good. I can't really say it's good because I want it. That would not be a good justification for why you want it. And the claim is that teleology captures exactly this point of view, that there is something good out there, and because it's good, justifies me to do something to get it. So this, that teleology captures here this obvious point about own actions is, I claim, is its first virtue. Now, what about value facts? What are those? Assume I come to the picnic ground and see the scene here. Then, naively speaking, I see, oh, that's not so good. There is this dirty garbage lying around here. So it strikes me that this situation here, which is not a fact because it doesn't exist, it is a sort of imagined possible state of this site, is not a fact. But what is a fact is that this state would be better than the state it is in now. So that is a fact, and that is a value fact. And that value fact gives me reason to bring about the improvement. Okay, and then of course also instrumental facts. Those facts, the fact that picking up the bottle and stuff it into the waste bin would be a good way of achieving the better state in the world. Okay. So the value fact that the state 2 is better than the state 1 gives not just me or a particular person, but gives basically everyone a reason to act, not just me or somebody specific. To understand this, of course, always remember that we're talking about the case where we share a world without differing perspectives. So, but if then everybody gets a reason for acting, then we have a problem. Who will actually act? And this is dealt with the notion of competency. So who will act on the good reasons depends on various other facts, summarized under this notion of competency, which is a sort of has two sides to its meanings. It means who has the needed skill, who is competent in that way, but also whose societal role it is, right? So, and a third one, namely the informational access, who is aware of the relevant facts. So that's somebody who doesn't see the mess that the site is in, wouldn't be competent to act. But it must be somebody, and also somebody who has the ability to pick this up or do something relevant about it, point one. And also, but the most likely person is the one, it comes up here, the one whose societal role it is to bring about this improvement, okay? So this notion of competency says, although everybody who has access to this scene here has reason to improve it. It's on the, if I have to predict who will do it, I will pick the most competent person. Okay. Another thing about that links to when perspectives are involved is the notion of subjectivity as opposed to idiosyncrasy. The claim of teleology is that we are the reasons that we act for are objective facts, or call it facts. And so this kind of evidence here, which was done by Alison Gopnik and Virginia Slaughter, I think. Known to developmentalists as the broccoli lover experiment. So children, they did this with about 18-month-olds, and the claim is that around 18 months, children start understanding this. All the children they tested preferred crackers over broccoli. Broccoli seems to be at least in North America, the prototypical hate food for children. And what they did in the experiment one of the confederates of the experimenter showed signs that she loved broccoli and didn't particularly like crackers. And then the child was asked by this person to give her something to eat, and the question was whether the child would choose a piece of broccoli or crackers. And the younger ones, before 18 months, tended to choose the crackers, but then the older ones, the broccoli. And this has been interpreted that they understand subjectivity of view, and in some sense that is true. But I want to make a distinction here and call this a kind of subjectivity, describe it as an idiosyncratic preference, right? Most people prefer crackers, but this funny person prefers broccoli for some reason. But after that, we can agree that it is an objective fact, not a subjective subjective fact that giving this person broccoli makes him happy. It's a good thing to give that person broccoli. And this turns into a value fact because a happy person is certainly better to have around than a dissatisfied person. So therefore, it makes an improvement to give that person a broccoli, but not an improvement to give her crackers. So that gives then objective reason to give that person broccoli instead of crackers. So the point here is there is a shared fact. Once you know about the idiosyncratic preference, that giving broccoli that person is better than giving the person cracker. So that means there is no perspective difference involved. We all agree, nobody has a different opinion about that fact. So there is no subjective view needed to be taken into account, and therefore no mental states which capture perspective differences. Okay, and now if we look at how does that look when we look at other people as opposed to our own view. So if we look at the broccoli's lover agent's own first-person view, then the broccoli lover, she sees eating broccoli as better than eating crackers. And it gives, I should say her, but from the broccoli's lover first-person perspective, that gives her a reason to go for the broccoli. But from the observer's view, the same results. So getting him, here he is now male, the broccoli lover, getting him broccoli makes him feel good and happy. Getting him crackers leaves him dissatisfied. Therefore, action one, state one is to produce state one is better than to produce state two. So that gives not only the broccoli lover reason to get the broccoli, but it gives us all reason to get to do something about it. For instance, to get the broccoli for him. And that is interesting because looking at it this way, it has cooperation inbuilt, right? So that gives us two, I think, features that are quite valuable, agree with our intuitions about our folk psychology, that teleology provides a unified view of reasons for acting for self and for the other person, right? Both see it the same way. And it makes people not poised for cooperation, right? The inbuilt cooperation that I mentioned here. So those are, I think, two further virtues that teleology has over theory of mind. So here are some illustration about how children very early on are poised for cooperation. Johannes Rössler, with whom I have worked on this together, has coined the one of his titles, "Adorable Altruism." And here are some data from Felix Warneken and the lab in Leipzig that illustrates this. I hope it works. Yeah, it seems to work. Many of you may have seen that before, but let's go back here to number, yeah. Here another one.
We can't see the video.
Sorry, you can't see the. Oops. How do I get back? You couldn't see it? Oh.
No, we couldn't.
Oh, sorry. That is a pity. Yeah, okay, it's not, but I can't get it. I know I have to, oh, okay. No, I am lost. Here we go. Can you see this? Can you see this?
No, it's just showing your PowerPoint. You have to come out of your PowerPoint and put it into a web page, and then it will show.
Oh.
Sorry, Josef, you'll have to share the screen, I think, for us to see it.
So I stop sharing and then do it again.
Yeah, and then share that screen. If you can share the YouTube screen, it should come up on our end.
Ah, okay. That was it. Yeah, but the YouTube screen is, I have it embedded in the, or called it up from the, oh, okay. I'll show it to you at the end. Is that okay?
Definitely.
Oh, can't get anything. Here we go. Can you see it this now?
Yes, we've got your presentation now.
Yeah, the presentation. I'll show you the video at the end if there is time. Okay.
Okay, that sounds good.
It just shows how eager children are at a very young age to help somebody who has problems. Okay. So folk psychology also has different uses. In the theory of mind literature, it's always, they only talk about predicting what somebody will do, or occasionally explaining what somebody will do. Predicting, the argument is that prediction is so important for in evolution, because it's very important to predict what a conspecific or some other creature will do in order to take precautions or whatever. But our folk psychology about action also lets us coordinate actions, justify actions, and not only explain and predict actions. So the principle that teleology uses to do those things is based on that people do what they should do. And that, of course, is modulated by competency. So whereas theory of mind is based on the so-called practical syllogism. If I know that an agent A wants X and knows that action A brings about X, the agent A will do the action A. Okay, so if we now want to, let's go to predicting. Predicting what a person will do, that works for both. So teleology will say, I have to figure out what should be done in this situation, and then I can predict that A, provided agent A is competent, will do that. The practical, the theory of mind can predict that. It is the arrows are the wrong way around. If I know what A wants and what he thinks, how he can get it, then I can predict that he will do action A. Okay, so that works in both cases. For explaining why agent A did the action, teleology uses the principle if A carried out this action, I have to find something why one should do this, and that would explain why he did it. And theory of mind uses the practical syllogism the other way around. So if I see A carries out the action, then I have to find out what he wants and what he thinks in order to explain why he did carried out this action. So here it works. But now let's go and see how one would justify an action. So teleology has no problem. Just says A did what he should have done. That gives a good justification. Or criticize the person, the negative case, A did something that he shouldn't have done. Okay, so that was wrong and so on. But how do you use a theory of mind to justify this? So if you ask, why did you do this? Then simply saying, I wanted to do it is, I think, a prototype of not giving a good justification, right? Answering in this trivial case with a mental state is a not very insightful justification, but it does work. Where it does work is when idiosyncratic beliefs and desires are involved. Then it pays off to quote the mistaken belief or something. And also we can coordinate actions. So for teleology, there's also no problem. You will be able to discuss the appropriateness of who should do what and then assign the instrumental roles. Okay, so if you want to hammer a nail into the board, we have to agree you hold the nail and I hammer, or the other way around. But how I should use the practical syllogism to coordinate our actions is not very evident. So one other virtue number 4 of teleology is that it can give a clear account for all at least those 4 different rather common uses of folk psychology. Okay, so then we have 3 more virtues left. And as I remind you, these are the theological ones, so not fully accessible to humans in their natural state without assistance, in this our case, from science. So here is first a problem. I have already mentioned that one severe limitation of teleology is that it cannot deal with agents who hold a different perspective. And this much used case is the false belief situation. Here, very briefly depicted how it is told to children. Max puts his chocolate into box 1, then he goes away. While he's away, the chocolate is transferred by somebody into box 2. Then Max comes back and he wants to get his chocolate. Where will he look for his chocolate? Right, so if you use teleology here, it won't work because Max's chocolate is in box 2, right? But he thinks it's in box 1. That poses a problem. From the teleologist's point of view, Max has good reasons to go to box 2 because that's where the chocolate is. And in order to get it, you should go to box 2, right? So the teleology would predict Max does what he should do, that is go to box 2. But unfortunately, he won't do that. He'll go to box 1. So the teleologist doesn't know how to explain this strange behavior. The solution is, we suggested that one can stay a teleologist, but one has to apply the teleology within Max's perspective. So if the chocolate, and one does that by reasoning counterfactually, if the chocolate were in box 1, where he thinks it is, then Max would have good reason to go there. Okay, so this is possible. At this point, I couldn't claim this to be a virtue, but more a complication. But with some scientific data, it will turn into virtues number 5 and 6. Here are some other concerns that one of our concerns is to avoid premature mentalizing. I think there is a common intuition that unless people's information differs, and which creates perspective differences, we do not mentalize. We still stay explaining and justifying actions by objective facts in the world and not by mental states. And there is evidence I want to present that this distinction matters. The evidence comes from development, that children have specific difficulties with tasks where perspective differences do matter. Okay, and this happens around 4 years. And also we have some data from brain imaging that only theory of mind tasks with false beliefs activate in an area associated with processing perspectives. Okay, so there seems to be in the brain and in development a separation between being able to understand actions as long as there is no perspective difference involved, and understanding actions when there is. Okay, so look at development, how that works out for teleology and theory of mind. So if we look at false belief data, how that should develop, teleology predicts that children should be consistently wrong, as I demonstrated, because teleology gives you the wrong answer. And then later, when they can do teleology within a perspective, then they will get the answer right. But theory of mind, naively looking, would predict children who don't have a theory of mind. They should guess randomly what Max will do. And then as they acquire a theory of mind, they will become consistently right. Of course, the data speak a different language here. They show something that confirms with teleology. Children are consistently wrong and then become right. The theory of mind, people, of course, can explain that by adding some rescue medicine, for instance, that typically paired with nativism, and then together with processing limitations. So the idea is children have, well, this actually doesn't work. The one that works is that nativism with default assumptions, that children have a theory of mind from very, very early on. But because of processing limitations, they it can't be shown before 4 years. And before 4 years, they have a default assumption, at least that's what Fodor suggested, that beliefs tend to be true. Okay, and that's why they get it consistently wrong. But from theory of mind, that they don't have a theory of mind and then they get one, actually predicts a different pattern. And another thing that speaks for development is that acquiring a false belief understanding comes hand in hand with the ability to reason counterfactually. And this can also be predicted by teleology in perspective, because, as I have pointed out, that requires counterfactual reasoning in itself. So let's look at the first point, that the false belief. Understanding comes at the same time in development as understanding other perspective tasks. So false belief, by and large, develops, or the false belief task is passed around 4 years, or 3 to 5 years roughly. And there have been lots of investigations of other so-called perspective tasks where also a false belief that have been correlated with a false belief task. So one is the appearance reality distinction, that this looks like a rock, but when you feel it, you find out this is just a piece of sponge. Children before 4 discover that it's a sponge, but then they can't say it looks like a rock. For them, it's a sponge and it looks like a sponge. Visual perspective taking. This looks, this turtle here looks like it's is lying on the back for the girl, but it is standing on its feet for Aristotle here, because he looks at it from a different visual viewpoint. And then there are ambiguous figures. The well-known duck rabbit. Even if you put the body, or so if you say, what is this? And they may think this is a duck. And then you put the body of a rabbit underneath, so that it starts looking like a rabbit. The children younger than 4, for them, it still stays a duck. They can't, once it's a duck, it's a duck. Can't be anything else. Also, there is the alternative naming game. Children know that this can be called a rabbit and a bunny, but if in that particular conversation you call it a rabbit, then the child can't tell you that it could also be called a bunny. They say it is called a rabbit. Okay. And that is interesting because, no, let's go. And similar things we have with labeling a person or a character here as a gardener, and then later as a rabbit. Then what happens is that the children who can't pass the false belief test lose the information they gained about it as gardener when it has become a rabbit. So they can't coordinate those two perspectives. Here is some other identity thing that you find out, that the key you marked with yellow because it opened the yellow box, that it is the identical key that opens the green box. That children have a problem understanding that those two keys are the same key, because identity remain, the two things that are identical are two, as the philosophers would say, is the same object under two different modes of presentation. And modes of presentation are basically perspectives. Another one that I mentioned here is this one could call Telic perspective taking, namely what players in a competitive game find good. So gaining for me more beats or whatever is good for me, but bad for you, and the other way around. And it turns out that children, before they pass the false belief test, are very bad at playing competitively in those games. Okay, so that all tasks that have some perspective problem in them, and they're all not mastered by children before they pass the false belief test. So there is a transition, teleology claims, from pure teleology, where there are problems with those, to teleology in perspective. So all perspective-free tasks can be mastered before the age, and all that depend on a perspective, they come later, so that there is this unique transition, is that teleology can explain this, is its fifth virtue. The similar thing, if we look into the brain, there is also a separation between teleology, which you use for explaining action, and then you have to, one could say, switch in an extra brain region for doing teleology in perspective. And that region is somewhere in the left IPL, that is the inferior parietal lobe. And we have lots of other tasks, similar to what I've shown you before, that are associated with processing those perspective differences. And it's not needed for reasoning about action, but it is needed when false belief is involved in those theory of mind tasks. And that teleology can explain this is its sixth virtue. But I will tell you a bit more what the findings are. So here is Matthias Schurz did a large meta-analysis of the hundreds of theory of mind studies that have been done in the scanner, and he could sort of divide them into 6 different sort of paradigms. I only pick out 2. There are quite a few studies which are taken from this false belief task with children, and a new thing are what are called here rational action, or RA, where you just have to figure out why somebody does something. So I think one paradigm example is that you see a person on a bed, and then tying the bed sheet into knots, into a sort of string, and you have to figure out that what he does is to trying to break out of prison, and he's making a rope to escape or something. Okay, and then here are the, I just picked out the left TPJ. TPJ is the temporoparietal junction, because this is the temporal lobe, this is the parietal lobe, and this is the junction here. And this region all around it is the TPJ. And that is considered central for theory of mind. But as you can see here, but pick out just those 2, the blue and the red, they overlap here strongly, but also incorporate other regions which the other one doesn't. And in particular, the red one is the one that false belief tasks activate, has this region in the upper part of the IPL here, which the pure action tasks do not cover, right? And so the idea is that this is included in false belief because perspective differences are central here, but is not covered by the other tasks because they don't require perspective difference processing. And interestingly, if you now use quite different tasks that you can claim involve perspective, you get an overlap in that very region. So we looked for very unlikely tasks that involve perspectives that normal people wouldn't classify as perspective tasks. For instance, understanding or processing identity statements. But when you know something about Frege and so on, then you realize that this has to do with perspective, because introducing a person as Mr. Dietrich, and before having introduced the same person as the dentist, are 2 different modes of presentation of the same person. Therefore, you can only understand the identity statement if you realize the perspective difference here. And the same, again, inspired by Frege, you have with equations that 3 times 8 and 36 minus 12, they are just different modes of presentations of the same number. So when you realize this, then some perspective differences should be processed. And another task here is that perspective differences occur when you have, if you know a person. So in this experiment by Matthias Toll, you learn people like this and learn something about them, that he collects nutcrackers or something. And then you see a person behind this screen, milky screen. You see there is a person, but you can't recognize the person as this one. And then you learn another fact about this person. And then you get to see the person. And then you have to realize that this person out there is the same person as this one you have seen before. And those you have to merge. So this is a sort of visual form of identity statements. And how does it work? All those, the green thing here is roughly where all those tasks that we used here overlap in the brain. This is in the upper part of the IPL. And the interesting thing is that that is this region here, that is actually a region where the mathematics, the task and the identity, the linguistic identity statements and this person recognition task overlap. And that is exactly in that region where the false belief test activates the brain, where other theory of mind tasks don't activate it. And the green blurb here is where visual perspective task and false belief overlap. So they're all in this region here. So that confirms this point that the brain has a theory of mind area it activates, but when perspective differences occur, then an extra region is needed. And that is virtue number 6 it was, but now we are left with virtue number 7. What is this? The claim is that is teleology explains why false belief tasks go hand in hand with the ability to answer counterfactual questions. So introduced with our standard false belief task with Max and his chocolate. So Max does a theory of mind explanation. For instance, Peter Carruthers sometimes has nice examples how theory of mind explains this. So if Max does not see the transfer of the chocolate, then his belief that it is in the original box is not updated. So he then therefore believes that it's still in the old place. And practical syllogism then lets you predict that he will look for it in the old place. So this kind of a chain of explanation here does not really have any place for counterfactual reasoning. Whereas teleology on its principles needs counterfactual reasoning. So the idea here is if only the events that Max has witnessed had taken place, so only the chocolate was put in place 1, but the transfer wouldn't have taken place because that's what he did see, then the chocolate would still be in the original place. And if so, then he would have very good reasons to go there and not where it now is. So that's how teleology can be used counterfactually within his perspective. And that gives you, with help of this counterfactual reasoning, the correct answer. So if this is the way false belief tests are handled, then no wonder that there should be a developmental correlation with answering counterfactual questions. And this has been investigated directly here with Eva Raffetzer. So here is the only one condition, the tricky condition. So Ben enters the room and leaves blue footprints on the floor, as you can see. He does not wipe it clean. This is here because in a control condition, he does wipe it clean. Otherwise, it wouldn't be used here. But in any case, he doesn't wipe it clean. Then Sarah enters the room and leaves red footprints on the floor. Okay, and then you can ask two questions. Either the false belief question, what does Ben think the floor looks like? And for an answer, children have to point out, looks like this, like that, or like that. Okay. And the alternative is that you ask a counterfactual question. If Mary had not walked with her dirty shoes on the floor, what would it look like? Again, what does it would it look like? So we know that younger children, but that's not so interesting anymore. They have a reality bias and say, well, that's what it actually looks like. Therefore, they point to this one. That's the reality error. But more interesting is another error that when asking if Mary had not walked with her dirty shoes on the floor, what would it look like? Well, if you just take this question and not relating it to the earlier part of the story, then you might come to the conclusion, well, if somebody doesn't walk with dirty shoes over a floor, then it stays clean. Okay, so you will opt for this. And this is sort of, we call it basic conditional reasoning. Whereas if you are able to reason counterfactually, that means that you have to relate this question to what happened before, or philosophers used to say you have to put it in relation to the possible world here must be the closest, the nearest possible world to the real world, then the answer would be this. Another sort of empty possible choice would be that. Okay, and here we see sort of the correct answer. The 3-year-olds very few give that, about as many as one would expect on correct answers on the false belief test. And it goes up by 6 years. They're pretty good in this particular experiment. The most interesting bit here is that the ones who this here shows what strategy, what answer they gave on the counterfactual question. And this here, and the color shows what of the bar shows what answers they gave on the false belief question. And you see that the children who gave the correct answer on the counterfactual question, almost all of them, or the large majority, gave the same answer on the false belief question. And also this interesting BCR question happens the ones who give the BCR on the CF question, then they also, most of them, then give the same answer on the false belief question. Okay, this is not as impressive as the red bar, but still the type of answer that children give on one question, they also tend to use on the other question. So this shows that there is a fairly close relationship between how they reason with false belief and counterfactual reasoning. Okay, and if we go back to the brain, there's also some findings. There are not that many studies, but there is one very nice one that looked at counterfactual reasoning and also used false belief. and tested for the conjunction. And they found that the peak voxel of that area is probably a larger area, but this is the peak voxel. And where does it lie? Well, exactly in that region where we reason is the region where perspective differences are dealt with. Okay, so also this is a very fitting result. Okay, so those were or my 7 heavenly virtues of teleology in favor over theory of mind as our folk psychology. What are those virtues? That teleology has the common sense virtues, that it captures, takes in it captures that one's own view of one's own actions. It provides a similar view of others' actions, therefore a unified view of how one looks at one's own and other people's actions. It makes people poised for cooperation, which is nice. And it covers all the different uses of folk psychology, all points that theory of mind doesn't do a good job on. Teleology has a restriction that it can't deal with perspective differences, but if one uses or allows teleology to be used within a perspective, then it can explain some experimental data that in development, children develop from not understanding perspective to understanding a lot of different perspective tasks, that the brain has a region that is used for theory of mind tasks, but it doesn't include a particular region in the IPL that is used when perspective is involved. And it can explain why counterfactual reasoning goes hand in hand with passing the false belief task. Okay, so, and this is teleology keeping a pace with modern times, and I'm looking forward to your questions. So I stop sharing and we can go into the question.
So thank you, Josef, for your very interesting talk. So let me open Q&A. And people who are online, as they already know, should write Q into the chat. They want to raise questions. So Jarda Peregrin, first. No? You do not? Okay.
I think Marco may have ended the question.
Okay, so Marco Fenici.
Ah, where is he?
I'm from the distance.
Yeah.
Hello, Josef. Nice to see you again. And I have a very short question. It's just, thanks for the data on contrafactuals. They were quite interesting to me. And the question is, would you see the capacity to develop contrafactual reasoning as a kind of key strategy to bring children out of the theological stance, or at least to get the capacity to reason about false belief beside the capacity to reason in terms of teleology?
I didn't quite get it. Sometimes you were a bit muffled. I don't know. So what the advantage of what exactly? The reasoning?
I will repeat. So do you see the possibility that the acquisition of the capacity to reason counterfactually is the kind of key factor bringing the children to develop the understanding of false beliefs?
It looked, I have to go a bit more deeply into that. There are two ways in which those tasks link. There is sort of the early thing where they just around 4 years, where children start understanding false belief. And here it looks like that the counterfactual tests that have been used to test this, they come earlier than the false belief understanding. Okay, But on our understanding, those are not really good counterfactual tasks, because you can arrive at the correct answer by what we call basic conditional reasoning. Okay, so basic conditional reasoning comes earlier than false belief reasoning. But what convinced us that there is a closer relationship between counterfactual and false belief reasoning are our later data, that if you use counterfactual tasks where basic conditional reasoning gives you the wrong answer, then you still get a very close relationship. So if you use those tasks, then false belief tasks become more difficult. Okay, now you could say, but then they both come at about the same time. There's not one coming early and followed by the other. So I don't know which one is the reason or is the condition for being able to do the other one, right? But one naturally would think it would be counterfactual reasoning to be able, but from the data I can't tell.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I see Kirill Potapov.
Hi, thanks. That was fascinating in many ways. It seemed like the tests that you were talking about in order to test this model was still very much created for the paradigm of theory of mind. I wondered if we could reframe it from a in a non-mentalistic way, kind of thinking all the way back to when even Baldwin was talking about this. I wondered to what extent concrete play and actually taking part in play was part of the mechanism of getting a sense of the teleology. So like what difference it made that kids are kind of the things like perspective taking then allows them to do things like role play, and then is there like a place here to explain effects like how role play makes them better at things like perspective taking, or is this not really the view for that?
By role play, you mean more generally what's called pretend play, that they pretend to be the doctor, or that this this pencil here is a train and they go or whatever. There is this is still an interesting question, what the precise difference is and why it may help. So there are some data that show that children who are good at pretense also tend to be better or earlier or pass the false belief test earlier, right? But of course, we don't know what what exactly mediates that relationship. So also we don't have a good idea about what ability goes into pretend play. Some people claim that's exactly more or less the same, except you don't believe it. But this is not clear what the mental capacities are that are needed for pretend play.
Thanks.
Okay, so Hilary.
Yeah, thanks very much. It may be that I just think of these issues from the perspective of theory of mind too much, so that when you were describing how teleology works, I had a hard time understanding the descriptions you use without seeing you as somehow smuggling in information about mental states. So for example,
when do I do that?
So for example, when you talked about how you need to address issues of competency, you said, well, they need to be aware of, we need to take aware of. Right?
Okay.
And that looks like just a bare appeal to whether they have beliefs about certain things. Right. So when we want to explain why it is that one person acts one way and a different person who lacks a certain bit of information doesn't act the same way, you say, well, it's just a difference in competency, or the teleologist says it's a difference in competency.
No. Okay.
Yes, and what difference in competency comes to is one has a belief which the other one doesn't. And so I'm not seeing how it is that the teleological view, I mean, that the way in which you're appealing to the teleological view doesn't have actually information about mental states being smuggled in the background without just being explicitly mentioned.
Yeah. The answer is that you don't need a mental state in order to see the difference. So how do you know that the person who sees or who sees the bottle on the ground believes that there is a bottle on the ground? You can tell because you see that that the bottle on the ground is within his visual field, right?
Even
So that's what you have to see. Then you can infer that he has a belief. And the idea in teleology is that I only need to see that he has informational access. And if he has informational access, then he is linked to that fact. And then I know that he will take it in as a reason for acting. And I don't need a mental state. Why do I have to say that beyond having access, he also needs to form a belief?
It's just that I have a hard time understanding what access is without seeing it as he's in a position to...
Well, how do you know that he has a belief?
Because he can see it.
Exactly. How do you know that he can see it?
Because his gaze is in a certain direction.
Exactly. And that's what the teleologist has to understand.
So the teleology just goes directly from gaze to...
Yeah, it's a fact. He knows that this is important. People who don't have that, they for them this fact is, they are not affected by this fact. That's exactly the point.
But what's really doing the work is this idea that there's, in effect, a kind of inference that goes straight from direction of gaze to informational access without going by way of
a belief. Yeah.
Direction of gaze produces belief.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. And now we can redescribe each of these things in the teleological case in ways that attribute inferences like that bypass information about mental states. That's the suggestion.
Well, the suggestion is that, I'm not quite sure what the question now is.
Yeah, it's just that in each case, when you described either the teleological view or the state view, it seemed like there were natural ways of filling in missing premises that you weren't mentioning.
Yeah.
Would make the two views look much more similar to one another than you're presenting them as being. And I see how you can now block that thought. But what I need to hear more about is what these direct inferences are in each case that are being attributed to them. In one case, it's eye gaze goes directly to informational access. And so we're attributing to them processing of the information by way of conceptualizing it as informational access instead of conceptualizing it as, oh, he's looking at it, so he must know that the thing is over there, or he's looking in the wrong direction, so he must not know.
No, the idea is I expressed it as an enabling condition. So as a teleologist, you are looking for objective facts out there that give people reason to do certain things. But you realize that you can use that fact explaining their action only if they have informational access to that fact.
Right.
Okay, and that's it. And I don't have to describe it as knowledge or as believing. The critical difference is that I can see, I mean, the state of affairs that is relevant is out there. The person is out there, and the visual field is something abstract, but it's still out there. And I can have to relate the person to that event or state of affair. I don't have to make understand it as a propositional attitude, for instance.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
So I have my own question, but Preston.
Well, so this was, hi, Josef, it's Preston. So
Who is it?
sorry, here.
Yeah, but I can't
We've got
recognize you as any particular person, just as a person who waves his hand around.
a disembodied voice.
Yeah.
So I have a question along the lines of Hillary's. I was imagining someone seeing the account of the teleological view and wondering about attributions of agents doing what they should, and thinking that that attribution of doing what they should might be loaded in ways that involve implicit mental state attributions. I don't know that that's my view, but I imagine that someone might have that. So as I was trying to think it out, it occurred to me, well, what do I think when I think that someone is or will do what they should? One way of doing it is in terms of instrumental reason, but then I'm going to say, well, he has a desire and he knows or he thinks that to fulfill the desire, he should do A, and then he does A. But then that looks like it involves mental state attribution.
Yeah, but
what
that's exactly what teleology tries to avoid.
Right. And so can you say something about what the view is supposed to be, where you can attribute that the people who are engaging in these teleological think things of the form agent will do what it should, but that doesn't involve mental state attribution? Could you say more about what that should is supposed to be?
Now, okay, let's take the false belief test, but make it simpler that Max puts his chocolate into one box and comes back later and wants his chocolate. Okay, so by telling me that he wants or he's going to get his chocolate, I learned that a desired state in this story is that he be where his chocolate is. Okay, and then the question is, what will he do? Well, he will take an action that he has good reason for taking, and that is to go where the chocolate is. Therefore, that's what he should do in order to get what is described here as desirable, and therefore he will take that action. But I don't have to say that he has a desire to do. It's just from understanding the story, it is clear to me that he getting to his chocolate is a desirable state.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, if I may have a question, I would like to know, the people like Henrike Moll and Andrew Meltzoff argued based on their study that there is some kind of understanding of different perspectives, maybe kind of practical implicit one, already at around 3 years, whereas your position seems to imply that under 3 years, there is no understanding of different perspectives, or what is your position on this issue?
Can you tell me what study he made this claim?
Study conducted by Henrike Moll and Andrew Meltzoff.
Okay, yeah. No, certainly going by age is a very rough thing. You really have to correlate it with some other task, and the claim is that whether it comes earlier or later. And yes, around that age, there is a variability what kind of tasks they can earlier or later, right? But roughly they didn't show that 2-year-olds can do this. And also there are some questions what exactly you have to understand in order to do. I think those were those color filter tasks.
Yeah.
Right. And okay, so here we are in the depth of discussing methodological differences or problems.
So we have space for one more question or comment. So Jarda Peregrin.
I have a rather simple-minded question, so forgive me if I'm just slow with it. So theology is a model. It's a model of some individuals in the real world, right? And if you talk about virtues of a model, you can mean internal virtues of the model, like simplicity or something like that. But the crucial virtues, of course, concern its relation to the reality, its adequacy, as it were. When you talk about a virtue that the individuals in the model are, for example, poised to cooperation, so it's a virtue because the real individuals, which is models, are poised to cooperation, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, we forgot to look at this video, but the idea here is that I mean most other virtues I sort of put forward virtues where because I think that here teleology comes closer to how we use our folk psychology than the theory of mind taking literally. But the one about cooperation is slightly different because, but here the claim comes out that that teleology makes us cooperative. But theory of mind later, or being able to take different perspectives into account, then makes us less cooperative, because then you can start competing in a pointed, intentional way. And that's why it's interesting that young children don't understand competition as a rational form of interacting, and tend to be very helpful, unless their own desires, of course, are concerned and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we are running out of time. So thank you again to Josef Perner for
Yeah,
his.
thank you for the whole conference. It was interesting as far as I got around to attend the talks. They were very interesting.